What is improvisation and musical improvisation, and how do you do it? It's a video I've wanted to make for a while, and I'm hoping I can share some of my thoughts about improvisation. I've been doing it since I was about 14 years old, and it's been a lot of years of experimenting, trying to figure out what works and what doesn't work, and basically one of the most important things you can do when you improvise, and this is one of the hardest things for most musicians to do, is to turn off, at least temporarily, that thing in your brain that says it has to be perfect. Because if you're making up music, there's a good chance you're going to make mistakes, and there's a good chance you're going to do something that you've never done before, hopefully. And when you do something you've never done before, it can't be perfect, because your ideal of perfect is what you've already done, and what has already been done is what tells you what's perfect. What Chopin did, what Beethoven did, what Gershwin did is the perfection that you're trying to emulate. So when you do perform, when you do improvise, the thing you're looking for is something new. How you get there is an interesting thing, because you start with, in the beginning, when you first start to improvise, you start out with no ideas of what to do at all, and you may just sit down on the piano and move your fingers around, put them in. And that's, instead of playing you just get your fingers in that position. And you start to fool around with, I can actually take the chords from that song So in the beginning, you may not have any idea what to even start with, because improvisation doesn't have any real rules. Basically, the rules for improvisation come from the music you're trying to imitate, or the style that you're trying to imitate. And if you're trying to make up your own style, at that point you have to take the rules from all the different styles of music that you've learned from and try to incorporate, build your own set of rules for that new type of music. But as far as the classical music is concerned, that uses a lot of 1 chord and 5 chord, 1 chord, 4 chord sometimes, and the melody notes usually have something to do with the chord, or they're passing notes, or neighbor tones. So a lot of times you're just playing chord tones when you play classical sort of improvisation. When you get a little bit more free, you start to build on bigger parts of the chord. Different chords, putting that, at this point I'm putting a flat 9 on my dominant chord. And understanding the difference between major keys. sometimes major. Sometimes minor. But as I was saying, if you want to improvise, you have to turn off a part of your brain that usually tells you when you played the wrong note, because sometimes play chords that don't even sound right. But that may just be something that you're passing from one chord to the next or one note to the next, and sometimes those notes don't sound right. So, when you first start improvising, you may just be fooling around with simple scales. You may do something all in the key of C. You may get stuck with one chord in your left hand when you first start improvising, not realizing you could change. Little patterns. Those are patterns that you might practice in some of your finger exercises. And then finally you realize that that one chord is extremely boring. There's a lot of things you can do, and you find that maybe the might go on too long, and like, oh well, if I can use some of that. And then you may find you want to get into, say, rock and roll. And rock and roll improvisation tends to be, for the most part, not that, because I played the wrong notes. Either based on just pentatonic or blues scales, Well, simple rock and roll tends to be based on those blues scales, pentatonic scales. Obviously, when you get into Steely Dan and Frank Zappa, you're dealing with much more complex harmonies and much more complex scales. You'd most likely be channeling more jazz and advanced classical concepts when you get into, Zappa, there'd be some classical concepts, and Steely Dan would definitely have a lot of jazz concepts. But for your basic rock, a good understanding of how you play Boogie Woogie would help to play that sort of music. When we get into jazz, basically you're using the harmony. Say you have a song that might just use the chords C and G, just like our classical song, and we'll do say Mary Had a Little Lamb. And that's one of the things about jazz voicings is these where you're taking basically your simple C chord, making it a C6 chord, and on the non-chord tones you can take that particular note D from the melody there and change it to a diminished chord. And when you get back to the C, it's back to that C6 inversion. Diminished chord, major, major 6 chord, diminished chord. So on the chord tones you would have your major 6 chord, diminished chord on the non-chord tones, major chord, diminished chord, major chord. And then if we wanted to use the flat 6 as a passing tone, we have diminished chord right there. So there's a simple way you can harmonize notes within your simple melody of on your one chord, and a lot of the notes in the 5 chord work with that diminished chord, and it becomes your flat 9 diminished or flat 9 dominant chord. So simple things like that can be used to find ways to improvise on a simple melody. Now, if you're doing straight improvisation and you want to improvise in some sort of in a jazz language, and you understand how to build these, one of the things that you should learn while you're learning to improvise is how to build all of your chords. You know, if you know how to play a 13th chord and a major 7th with a 9th in it, you can use all these voicings. Dominant 7 with a flat 9, just a simple minor 9. There's that 13th chord, another 13th chord. Dominant 7 with a sharp 11. All these things can add color to your improvisation, a minor 11 chord. But use all those things don't make any difference if you don't find ways to make them work. You know, how do, like when you listen to a Thelonious Monk song, how do chords change from one place to another? A lot of times they go in cycle 5. Sometimes they go down a half step. Sometimes things change by a half step, but keep some, like, if you start with a minor chord, bring your root down, but root and your 5th down, but keep the minor 3rd and the minor 7th the same. You suddenly have a nice major, so you can change keys in your improvisation by simple little shifts of certain notes. Always remember what key you're actually in. One of the drawbacks about improvisation is sometimes you change keys in the middle of something and you're thinking in F minor, and then you decide to change to E major 7. And what I just did accidentally there was to play the F natural in the middle of that. So because my brain had not completely changed into the new key yet. And now one of the most important things about improvisation is if you actually know all of your scales, then you can have something to say in that new key. So, I'm pretty sure that I could talk for hours and hours and hours about improvisation. I would like to say one of the things that I would suggest, that if you are a parent and you have children who are learning to play music, one of the most important things you can do with them is to, when they do start improvising, don't think of it as them playing the wrong notes, because a lot of times it will sound like the wrong notes. And that, for an example, I would say, if you had a kid who was supposed to be playing Mary Had a Little Lamb, and you're expecting him to be playing this, and I just want you to imagine if Beethoven had not been born yet, and had not written his greatest pieces of music, and your kid is supposed to be playing this, and for some reason he's playing this, and he's laughing, that's not funny. But Beethoven hadn't been born yet, and you said, well, that's not Mary Had a Little Lamb. Well, it isn't Mary Had a Little Lamb, but he is playing something. And if little Johnny is playing, making up music, it may be the first steps in little Johnny becoming a great composer. So never stop your children from improvising. You might say, well, a certain portion of their time can be improvising, and a certain portion should be playing the lesson and getting the lesson well rehearsed. But when they do start improvising, don't hold them back, because that could be the start of something really wonderful. Every song that I've ever written started with improvisation. Every song that Beethoven ever wrote started with improvisation. Every song that Mozart ever wrote started with improvisation. Every composer who's ever, as far as I know, every composer who's ever written anything, well, I'd say every composer who's ever written anything worthwhile started with improvisation. I know there was a school of thought where you could use mathematics to write music when I was at college, and I didn't pay much attention to it, because I don't think mathematics has much to do with writing music. And I apologize for my neighbors slamming their, whatever door that was. I think it was a cellar door. But yeah, I don't think mathematical formulas don't create music by themselves. You need improvisation, and you need the mind of a human being to make lots of mistakes and select the good notes from those mistakes, because that's basically what improvisation tends to be. It's we take whatever we're doing, start fiddling around like that, and next thing, and hopefully we'll come up with something that we liked, or something that we at least tolerated, and then we're on to our next improvisation the next time. So do me a favor, like the video, subscribe if you can. I'm trying to grow my channel. This is the first time I've ever done anything similar to this with me babbling for a long time. But please, if you get a chance to subscribe, and tell any of your friends who like music to come and subscribe if you can. And thank you very much. And I will see you on the next video. Thanks.